One of the earliest controversies I can remember in video games is the ending of Mass Effect 3. When the game came out in 2012, everyone had an opinion, whether they played the game or not. The ending was trash. Red, blue, or green? How could they end the trilogy like this? They ruined Mass Effect. This backlash haunts BioWare to this day. Forums, Reddit threads, YouTube videos, comment sections. It doesn't matter where you go or who you talk to. The perception is clear. Mass Effect 3's ending did not meet expectations. Now, in 2021, millions of us are revisiting or playing this series for the first time. In the Legendary Edition, BioWare made few changes to Mass Effect 3. Save for the visual updates and taking out multiplayer, we're playing the same exact game that came out 9 years ago, including the ending with the extended cut changes. If Mass Effect 3 was really that bad, we should still feel it, right? The best part of doing these 2021 reviews is seeing how perspectives have shifted. Our perception of video games has changed so much. Our expectations have changed so much. Now that it's 2021 and we're looking at this game with a fresh set of eyes, was Mass Effect 3 really that bad? You can't tell the story of Mass Effect 3 without talking about this trilogy. Hot off the heels of KOTOR and Jade Empire, BioWare already had a reputation for making solid RPGs. But when they released their epic space opera in 2007, it exposed the studio to a much wider audience. Putting players in the shoes of Commander Shepard presented this unique blend of action RPG and choose-your-own-adventure style video games. Fly around in your ship, explore uncharted worlds, make decisions, navigate galactic politics, save the galaxy. What more could you want? All of it was wrapped in this cinematic package that felt more accessible than many RPGs at the time. I think what's most impressive to this day is BioWare's vision for carrying player choice between games. You weren't just making decisions that would play out at the end of this journey. You were helping to shape the events of future games. Nowadays, plenty of games offer player choice, but the vast majority reflect those decisions by the end of the game that you're making your choices in. Still, a decade later, Mass Effect and Dragon Age are among a very, very short list of series that let you import your save from previous games. This creates the perception that I made a mark on this universe. What I did, the choices I made, matter. Leading up to Mass Effect 2 and 3, I knew that my version of this universe would play out in the next game. Putting that sort of power in the hands of the player creates this powerful connection, a level of agency that, whether my choices ended up mattering or not, I felt deep in my bones. It also builds expectations that can make or break the legacy of a franchise. When Mass Effect 2 released in 2010, it elevated those stakes higher than anyone could imagine. It's regarded as one of the very best games in the history of video games. Where the original set the foundation for a universe, the sequel plunged deep into every single corner. We knew the genophage happened, but now we met the scientists who engineered it. And later, we'd be forced to choose between reversing or maintaining it. We knew Cerberus did unspeakable things, but now we were forced to work with the Elusive Man. And later, we'd have to join him in controlling the Reapers or defeat him. Mass Effect 2 is still one of the most competent games I've ever played. It knows what it's doing, and it absolutely crushes it in every single phase. But even more impressive to me is how, within the context of the trilogy, it manages to send us barreling through its narrative arc while also developing storylines from the original game. It has that uniquely rare quality of being enjoyable as a standalone experience and as a sequel. It's like a neatly wrapped gift with a very pretty bow on top. But for how legendary the Suicide Mission is, Shepard's story was not over. The Reapers were coming, and so many of those choices we made along the way needed to be seen through. Mass Effect 3 is the culmination of all the stakes, all the weight of everything we did, all of it comes down to this. We might have stopped Saren, but the Reapers were the real threat. We might have stopped the Collectors, but the Reapers were controlling them. The final fate of the galaxy was in our hands. When I love a video game, I relate to it on an emotional level. I carried so many expectations, so many feelings into Mass Effect 3. I was ready to see the ending of my favorite franchise of all time. The hype was at absolutely absurd levels. You had fans of the series ready to play out the ending, you had newer players who loved Mass Effect 2 and wanted more, and you had the attention of the general gaming community who wanted to see if the follow-up to one of the best video games of all time would live up to the insane hype. Huge, overhyped video games are like heavyweight boxers, right? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Mass Effect 3 fell, and it fell hard. What happened, happened. It's done and dusted. I'm not here making this video to revise history, but I do think that we're so far removed now that it's easier to re-examine this game and this controversy. Mass Effect 3 came out in the early part of 2012, and it quickly became the most controversial game of all time. It all started before launch with Day 1 DLC. Mass Effect 3 had a slew of pre-order content, but before the game even came out, there was a big red flag. The From Ashes DLC pack gives you a mission, a couple weapons, but most important of all, a new squad mate, Javik, a living, breathing Prothean. In the context of these games, Protheans were at the center of this mystery. Getting to meet the species who left breadcrumbs behind to defeat the Reapers was one thing, but getting to bring one of them on all of your adventures in the final entry was another. Javik's presence in Mass Effect 3 was not only profound, it felt necessary. That's why, when it was discovered that some of the framework for Javik came preloaded on Mass Effect 3 discs, it sucked. There's no doubt about it. BioWare came out and explained that they did the same thing for Mass Effect 2's DLC characters, the key difference being that those did not release alongside the full game. Day 1 DLC is really a thing of the past now, but the practice of selling content which feels necessary to the larger experience still goes on in different forms. Looking back from 2021, though, you can't make up excuses for bad business practices. I think it's fair to suggest this wouldn't have been as much of an issue if BioWare held on to the DLC for a month or so. Then again, it wouldn't have mattered much because this problem was swallowed whole by what came next. In the review period, Mass Effect 3 enjoyed mostly praise from critics. It didn't score quite as high as its predecessor, but it came really close, and it remains within the top 200 games of all time on Metacritic, which says a lot. But when fans got their hands on the game, the conversation shifted away from glowing reception. All of that weight, all of those choices, and the trilogy ended in crushing disappointment for many people. Many pointed to BioWare's promises for the ending to offer more granular outcomes based on choices. Others pointed to specific outcomes they didn't like, such as the Geth being killed off by the destruction ending. No matter the grievance, fans united. They signed petitions, they raised money for charity, they voiced their concerns. And ultimately, it worked. BioWare listened and responded. Just a few months later, they released the free extended cut DLC, which altered some details about the ending and added more clarity to the final moments. It's crazy to think about now because you could argue this event signaled a huge shift in the way developers interact with their communities. Even on single-player games, developers are much more receptive to feedback because, as we've seen, it can make or break the perception of your game. Another problem that was huge was Mass Effect 3's Galaxy at War system. While it's not in the Legendary Edition, this is responsible for a lot of the negative reception back in 2012. This basically required players to go out and play the new multiplayer mode or interact with apps outside of the game in order to maximize war assets in what is, for all intents and purposes, a single-player game. It's kind of insane how heavily they weighted this system because your readiness rating functioned as a multiplier, which means if you didn't want to mess with any of that stuff, it limited your ending, your war assets by half. Before they changed it with the extended cut DLC, it was actually impossible to get all of the endings without playing multiplayer. Of all the grievances people have with this game and of all the things we'll talk about in this video, this one has the most weight for me. No matter how cool the idea is, you can't force multiplayer onto a single player experience, especially when the other games in the series did not have multiplayer. This is the ending of a trilogy, so introducing this mode felt gimmicky, but also it felt like a betrayal of expectations for fans. But to tell you the truth, I loved this multiplayer. I had such a fun time playing it with friends. But that's really not the point. I didn't love it because it was attached to galactic readiness. I loved it because it was fun on its own. For these reasons, and more that we'll get into, Mass Effect 3 is still one of the most divisive video games we've ever seen. But in 2021, we have the luxury of looking back with a clearer mind and better intentions. I'm not holding on to any of the anger I felt 9 years ago. 9 years in the chaotic, ever-evolving world of video games feels like an eternity. And yet, we still remember Mass Effect 3. It was that big of a deal. Ever since that moment, BioWare's kind of had a rough go of it. I guess you could say the last win came with Dragon Age Inquisition, which actually won Game of the Year 2014. Then you had Mass Effect Andromeda, which didn't meet expectations and had its own issues. Next came Anthem, which was just a few years ago, but it kind of feels like ancient history to me. Maybe that's because Legendary Edition just came out and reminded us of what made BioWare magical in the first place. With Dragon Age 4 around the corner and the next Mass Effect on the horizon, BioWare seems positioned for a win. But for now, we're stuck looking to the past, and Legendary Edition can't cover up the long shadow that Mass Effect 3 is still casting. We'll get to that ending, but first, let's talk about everything else that makes a Mass Effect game special. From the very beginning, this series has been about presentation, delivering a cinematic experience in a sci-fi setting. A huge chunk of this game is spent in cutscenes, watching characters talk, asking questions, and witnessing big set-piece moments. It has to, because there's so much to resolve in this game alone. And luckily, Mass Effect 3 benefits from a small bump in animation quality compared to the previous games. Shepard's face in particular reflects emotion in ways that feel appropriate and, most important of all, consistent. If you choose that bottom right option, you know what kind of reaction you're gonna get without even looking at it. Consistency to me is such an underrated aspect of animation. What plagues a lot of games these days is not the quality of animation, but that the faces don't match the emotions too much of the time. It creates this weird disconnect where subconsciously, I don't know, I'm just not convinced. Maybe it has to do with games being bigger, the volume of lines, the sheer number of faces to animate makes it more difficult to hit that quality standard. Shepard's face in Mass Effect 3 is not 2021 quality, but it has a level of consistency where it's still satisfying to choose options and see my response reflected. You also get this no-nonsense sort of tone that feels unique to this game. We're in the middle of a war to decide the fate of the galaxy, so there's a lot of cut-to-the-chase dialogue options that feel appropriately impatient. This is the first time I played the trilogy mostly Renegade, and I don't think I'll ever go back. Maybe it's because I'm a bit older, but the everyone gather in a circle and sing Kumbaya nature of going Paragon feels unrealistic. Shepard is on a mission and needs results. Some situations require finesse, and I could never be a dick to my squad members. But I found the brusque, sort of assertive delivery of Shepard in this game strikes just the tone I expected. One of the most satisfying changes is the seamless transition between cutscenes and gameplay. Mass Effect 3 has this dolly zoom effect that you see each time Shepard goes from talking to someone to fighting or running around. It's such a clean effect that makes the whole package feel more polished than the first two games. It's one of the first things I noticed when I started it again in the Legendary Edition. Combat probably got the biggest upgrade across the board. Maneuvering Shepard feels smoother thanks to the dodge roll and orbiting around cover. Flashy additions like the heavy melee and cover execution add more flavor to the mix. In 2021 though, gameplay feels a bit too sticky. At least once per fight, I'll get stuck on a corner or Shepard won't take cover like I'm expecting and I'll die. It's been said that Andromeda has the best combat in the series, and after this replay, I'm still not quite ready to sign off on that. There's a certain rhythm to the original Trilogy combat that speaks to me, but I don't think it aged as well as it could have. It's just a bit heavy, and at worst, it can feel kind of clumsy. However, the sheer variety and the depth of options more than makes up for that. I mean, there are just so many skills, weapons, and armor pieces to play around with that it's impossible to get bored. It's mind-blowing to be near the end of the experience and have like 15 assault rifles to choose from. One of my favorite additions is the weapon weight system. The more guns you carry, the slower your powers recharge. I love when games force risk-reward trade-offs like that, so this is a great addition. The skill system benefits from a similar idea with evolutions. You're forced to make a decision between one skill upgrade and another, but this time it's halfway through the skill's progression instead of being at the very end. These changes combine to make me feel like I have more control over my loadout before each mission, and I love that. The only part of this fantasy that takes a step back is party selection. Mass Effect 2 is famous for having this huge, amazing roster of characters, and while I didn't want them to add more options just to add them, it still feels underwhelming to go from 12 members down to 7. Speaking of characters, Mass Effect 3 does everything it can to show you so many characters you've met across the trilogy. You'd think that would come off as heavy-handed or forced, but they appear in situations that are believable. You run into Garrus on Palaven because he's got experience fighting the Reapers. You find Jacob on a base run by ex-Cerberus. Grunt is leading his own squad as a key member of Clan Erdnot. Fan service is fan service, but I love the way BioWare peppered these aha moments throughout the game. When I first played this game, I didn't like James at all. He felt like another boring military type, but I don't know, he really grew on me this time around. He still fades into the background compared to the more fantastic characters that appear just in this game, like Specialist Trainer. Javik is such a brilliant character. Seeing Liara discover the Protheans were conquerors instead of this noble species everyone built them up to be is a special moment. I couldn't help but bring Javik on missions late in the game. I wanted to help him get his revenge. He needed to be there. Anderson is a character that doesn't get enough love. I feel like this game has several scenes that give room for Shepard and Anderson to connect on the level that you kind of expect them to, and I love that. When I think about the more reserved, believable characters in this series, Admiral Hackett is right at the top. He gives you such a genuine performance that hits all the right notes. Even though he's not in this game as much, Martin Sheen's Elusive Man is still one of the very best characters in this series. And he really sells it in the final moments when he's trying to fight against indoctrination but thinks he's still in control. Even without the insane quality of modern motion capture, I could still feel the raw power behind his performance. Martin Sheen is unbelievably good in this role. I could keep going on, but we need to move on. But it goes without saying that Mass Effect has some of the best characters and character development in any video game. One of the most impressive things about Mass Effect 3 in 2021 is the game's structure. How it convinced me that I'm playing a game about war on a galactic scale. Where the first two games fulfill different fantasies, the first was about chasing down a rogue Spectre, and the second was about building a team to tackle a suicide mission, the third takes on a tone that honors all of the weight of the moment and everything that led us there. This is all-out war. There are no more excuses, and there is no more time. And that sense of impending doom is baked into the pacing, into the structure. That's why the Reaper's descent on London is one of the most memorable missions of this trilogy. It conveys that urgency to the player in the opening minutes of the game, by forcing us through this gauntlet in order to survive the invasion, all while Earth is burning before our eyes. But it doesn't stop there. When I think about games centered around large-scale conflict, most of them don't really convince me. I'm bouncing between levels, doing a bunch of corridor shooting, but the true extent, the massive scale of war, the direness of the situation, all of that gets lost. Maybe it's the pacing, the imagery, maybe it's that most of these games these days try to be open world when they don't need to be. I'm not quite sure, but I do know that's not a problem in Mass Effect 3. This game does such an incredible job of making sure everything you do and see regarding the war is tangible. Palaven is burning in the horizon. You must save a diplomat to earn the Turian support. Huerta Memorial is overwhelmed, so you have to help the doctors who need supplies. Thessia is under attack and pretty much lost to the Reapers, but you still have to fight through a war zone to find intel for the war effort. Each and every conflict involves or is a result of this war. Even when you're scanning planets, it's no longer this passive activity where you can take a breath. If you scan too much, the Reapers will find you and chase you down. It's such a small detail, but it's yet another way this game constantly reminds me of the stakes. The war asset system makes this even more effective. Everything you do as Shepard has some sort of value to the war effort. Doing something as small as saving a research team gives you a small boost, while brokering an alliance between the Solarians and the Krogans wins a massive bonus. All of my actions and choices are cataloged on the war table, and I know I cared about this because I stopped to check my assets count after every single mission. It's weird because for me, a lot of the time, I kind of hate it when systems feel gamified. But in the sci-fi setting on a warship like this, it works. Across the board, this game sticks to the script, and it creates a level of cohesion that sort of glues everything else together. When I think about the best DLC in video games, The Witcher 3 and some of the older Fallout games come to mind first. But I also think of Mass Effect because every single solitary piece of content feels like it was made for people who love this world. Lair of the Shadow Broker is probably still my favorite, but Omega in Mass Effect 3 is incredible. And even though it's a detour from the war, it doesn't feel inappropriate because we're revisiting a place that was so important to the trilogy, we're spending time with characters we love, and most importantly, we're gathering allies. Leviathan plays out like an episode of Ancient Aliens that doesn't end up being disappointing. Coming across the origin of the Reapers and indoctrination at the bottom of an ocean world is still such an awesome reveal. And Citadel. How could we not talk about Citadel? I don't know if there's a more self-aware piece of entertainment. You don't get a DLC like Citadel without developers that care about their game, their characters, and their world. I will forever appreciate how BioWare showed us the shore leave version of everyone. One last moment for all these characters I love to let their hair down, relax, order pizza, dance, just have a good time. I wish more games did something like this because it, humanizes the experience. And in this case, it felt like the perfect send-off before the final assault on Earth. Lots of franchises have great music, but my God, I can't listen to the ending tracks of Mass Effect 3 without tearing up. There are few pieces of media that do that to me. I mean, I'll cry in certain movies, maybe a few books, but there are a dozen tracks in here that make me feel. I don't even have to be playing this game. I hear them and I feel. Mass Effect has always had great music, but Mass Effect 3 strikes a magical chord on a deeper level for me. What does the end mean in the context of Mass Effect? This isn't just any ending, it's the ending. This trilogy is so much more than the conflict between Shepard and the Reapers. From the very beginning, BioWare invited us into this fully developed, rich sci-fi universe. Not as a passive observer, but as an active contributor. They exposed us to fantastic characters, exciting plots, and recurring themes that we grew to know and love. They let us define the tone of the central protagonist, the hero of this story. The ending does need to resolve the ultimate conflict with the Reapers, but it also needs to honor all of the decisions we made for our Shepard. And it needs to leave us with some sort of resolution and give us an idea of how this universe continues after the credits roll. So, what if the earth-shattering reveal during the climax doesn't pay off? Because no matter what scenario BioWare had in mind, it doesn't give enough weight to the decisions you made along the way. For many people, the conclusion to this series should have been defined by the choices they made rather than the story this series sought to tell us from the beginning. It doesn't matter what the Star Child says some ancient alien race did millions and millions of years ago. It matters what I did to get to this moment and how my actions shaped this story. For BioWare, the end of Mass Effect came down to a script that was already written, and that script yanks the controller away from the player and says, "Here, this is the ending of Mass Effect for all Shepards." This series is about giant killer robots attacking the galaxy, but it's also about stepping into the shoes of Commander Shepard, making decisions, and hopefully seeing your choices play out. Did you save, or did you kill the Rachni Queen? Did you delete Malin's data, or did you keep it just in case? Did you activate Legion, or sell him to Cerberus? All of these decisions have a perceived impact on the world that you see play out at some point. This is a loop that we recognize and pretty much expect by the third game. The problem for me, though, is the first 95% of Mass Effect 3 knows that I exist, but the final moments forget about me entirely. It's such a shame, because for the first 39 or so hours, you're seeing the ending of many arcs involving characters you've grown to love over 100 hours of playtime. The choices you're making are not only driven by this galactic war, they represent the culmination of plot threads introduced in the first and second games, of conflicts that stretch back way far before Shepard mattered or was even born. We have this shared sense of impending doom, where all the species are essentially forced to join together or die. This drives all of these plots to their conclusion and contextualizes them within the central conflict. Surkesh and Tachanka are just so satisfying. Deciding the future of an entire race who has been genetically modified against their will is such a brilliant position to put the player in. I'm still not able to lie to the Krogan in order to unite them with the Solarians. No matter what, it just feels wrong. Rannoch in particular really hits home because you're resolving one of the biggest conflicts reaching back to the original game with the Geth and the Quarians. And the sacrifices you have to make if you don't unite them are monumental. Thessia and the race for the Prothean VI, the horrific discovery on Horizon, and the fallout of Cerberus and the Elusive Man. These moments do honor your place in the universe. They deliver on that promise of player choice and impact. But this obsessive tendency for these games to remember what you did when it mattered is abandoned when it really matters most. One way to make players feel like their choices don't matter is by setting up false expectations. You see this with Rannoch when Shepard has the chance to unite the Geth and the Quarians. If you manage to pull that off by making tough decisions like sacrificing Legion, you basically achieve the impossible. You brought organics and synthetics, who were mortal enemies for the entirety of the series, back together to fight in the war for the galaxy. The Geth even promised to help the Quarians resettle their homeworld. It's this incredibly sweet moment that hits home on so many levels, except that it doesn't end up mattering if you choose the destruction ending. And hey, you might think, yeah, that's how the cookie crumbles. Choose another ending. But it's such a subversion of expectations to the point that it feels like a betrayal. Why would you let the player put all that emotional energy behind solving one of the biggest conflicts in the universe, and then it's too bad. It doesn't matter because destroying the Reapers requires all synthetics to die. Why let me save the Geth when they were gonna die anyways? That's like pulling the rug out from under the player. It's a sacrifice that doesn't serve a purpose. It takes a sharp left turn when everything suggested it was going to be a right turn. In this specific example, making peace with the Geth and the Quarians could have led to a destruction ending where all synthetics don't have to die. Perhaps the Leviathans left a backdoor in the Catalyst programming where, if organics can prove that creators and creations can coexist, the energy blast isolates the Reapers from the rest of synthetics. Now, I'm sure I can already hear you typing out there. There's some sort of plot hole in my hypothetical here, but I think it paints a very clear picture of how false hope undermines the player in one of the biggest spots imaginable. You might be wondering about the other endings. There are color-coded decisions, and it's true that you get to choose between those, but red, blue, and green really don't end up mattering when they're all shades of the same color. Plus, I think the real issue is that the most natural conclusion to the series is destruction. Shepard is destined to defeat the Reapers, and while Control and Synthesis do offer options that might seem shiny on the surface, it's hard to come up with any meaningful reason why Shepard would pick these. Are synthetics really important enough to Shepard that we'd choose Control, side with the indoctrinated Elusive Man, and let the Reapers live? I really do not think so. Are synthetics important enough to Shepard that we would decide everyone will become this hybrid organic synthetic species? I don't think Shepard would be comfortable making that decision either. It's legitimately hard to suggest Shepard would do anything other than destroy the Reapers at the very first chance. Now, I won't lie and say I've never chosen the other options. I used to play Paragon only, and Synthesis felt like the please everyone ending that I thought I wanted. But playing back through the trilogy now, destruction feels like a no-brainer, so the weight of that decision falls flat. Why is it so important for this ending to honor choice and consequence? Why couldn't it come down to one set outcome that BioWare felt was right for their story? For me, when a game allows for choices that impact the story, it totally shifts the balance of power from developer to player. It's an open invitation. It opens the door and says, hey, this is your story now. You are Shepard. You define that character and what they mean to you. Tilting the power dynamic like that redefines the experience around the player's ownership of the story. And we know that BioWare knows this. They made one game and then built 2 more games full of events with choices, with reasonably developed outcomes made specifically for the decisions that we made. It's true, no matter how much we feel like we're embodying Shepard, there's a limit to that fantasy, right? We're all playing a version of Shepard that was scripted for us. But that's not the point here. We saw from the first and second game that it's more about the perceived impact of decisions. It's about the setups and the payoffs. It's about the way a world convinces us that what we do matters instead of what we do actually mattering. So realistically, how could Mass Effect 3's ending have given more authorship to the player? I think you can look at the many versions of the Mass Effect Happy Ending mod and get a pretty clear answer. This is a fan-made alternate ending that does a lot of stuff, but it removes the Catalyst scene from the game and assumes Shepard destroys the Reapers. That in and of itself removes the red, blue, green choices entirely. In this ending, the Geth and EDI survive. The Normandy stays in the Milky Way. The Citadel and all of its survivors are shown. And of course, Shepard lives. We get to see everyone reuniting on the Normandy. So, just as the title suggests, this is a happy ending. This mod is so important to the conversation because it reminds me of Mass Effect 2's ending. That game had a suicide mission with impossible odds. The stakes are incredibly high there too. You're reminded of how dire it is and how you may not come out alive. And yet, that game offers a pretty clear path to a happy ending. If you do all of the loyalty missions and make the right choices in the final moments, you are rewarded with that happy ending. Mass Effect 2 is a game with an ending that is directly tied to my actions and the decisions that I make. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than being confined to the options given to me by the Star Child who appears in basically the 11th hour. Speaking of, we need to talk about the catalyst, because I know that this moment didn't work for a lot of people either. The Star Child is the ancient artificial intelligence who is technically pulling the strings behind the scenes all along. Their purpose is to make sure organics are not completely wiped out by synthetics. Unfortunately, it found that organics were the real problem. Life will always create robots to better itself, but at the same time, creations will always surpass their creators. It's an inevitable cycle that is basically a predetermined outcome. So the Catalyst found a final solution to them in the Reapers. Every 50,000 years, for basically forever, these death robots descend on the galaxy to wipe out advanced species before they're able to create synthetics capable of taking over. In order to save organics, the Catalyst decided it has to kill organics using the Reapers before they kill themselves. I know some people didn't buy this, they still don't, but honestly, I think it works. Mass Effect 3 did need to explain the motivations behind the Reapers at some point. Can you imagine this game ending without that? The idea that robots will eventually rebel and kill their creators. The idea that humans, or in this case, all organics, will create robots, and no matter how many safeguards they create, those robots will gain self-consciousness and see humans as a threat and defend themselves. These are familiar ideas because the fear of robots taking over organics is a staple of this series. After this moment, the Quarian-Geth conflict seems different, right? It's essentially a cautionary tale, an example of the real issue for the rest of sapient life. We see this as a recurring theme throughout these games. Self-aware artificial intelligences are taboo. Shepard has to make big decisions regarding synthetics and organics. Cerberus putting Edie in the Normandy SR2 is seen as dangerous. Unshackling her and giving her a body is even more controversial. Activating Legion, Project Overlord, the Rogue VI on Luna, there are countless examples. Discovering the Reapers themselves are the result of the same sort of philosophical dilemma we see over and over again, delivered that shock value I was hoping for, while also bringing everything full circle in a way that feels satisfying. This explanation for the Reapers still resonates with me because it's familiar, but also because getting the answers to these mysteries that have been lingering since the first game is fulfilling in and of itself. I do think that BioWare got this right. How did it go so wrong right after? I think BioWare made the mistake of putting all of their chips on the table. They wanted to match the intensity of one final battle by offering one final decision that would shape the future of this universe. And to be fair, Red, Blue, Green does achieve that. But in doing so, I think they made the critical error of undermining the player. By offering 3 choices to define the end of the trilogy, you effectively limit how much choice these endings could reflect. The sum of all of our decisions just can't be properly defined by one choice in the end. So the solution, and I'm no game developer, but I love this series, the solution in my mind is that we shouldn't have been able to decide the future of the galaxy in the way that we did. The Crucible was designed by countless species before ours to destroy the Reapers, or at least that's how we understood it before the final scene. If we built it successfully and powered it up, the Crucible should have destroyed the Reapers outright, then and there, no questions asked. And if that happened, it would have given room for the rest of our choices to be reflected in the aftermath, in the resolution after the climax of the story. For example, our war assets could have determined the fate of each species. If we earned enough support, then they would have survived. Those that we failed to support, or we had to make a tough decision between one or the other, maybe they died. Those are outcomes that are directly tied to my decisions of what I did, my impact on the world. Instead, what we got is, red, blue, green. It just robbed us of the closure that we needed for Shepard, this universe, and all of the choices we made along the way. Speaking of, I think games need to do a better job of giving room to process the ending. We need time with our characters after the big bombshell drops. The original ending really doesn't give you a proper send-off accounting for all that happens in the final moments. The extended cut DLC does try to fill in the gaps that the launch version left out. For a game with tons of characters, species, and choices, it needed one of those Fallout-style slideshows that it ended up getting. The biggest adjustment in my mind is that the DLC overall brightens the outlook after that ending. Some of the ways you feel this is Hackett explaining that, yeah, the mass relays can be repaired and that organics will bounce back. There is a bright future. You see the Normandy lifting off from that planet and you assume it's returning home. You see all of this if you have high war assets. But no matter what, destruction still kills off synthetics. That felt like the perfect opportunity to right the ship, to get things back on track, but they either quite didn't understand why people were disappointed or they were too proud to change the ending. Either way, what's done is done. I think this ending could have been better, and I hope BioWare learns and remembers what makes Mass Effect special in the first place. Before we wrap this up, I can't talk about Mass Effect 3 without mentioning the indoctrination theory. It's still one of the coolest interpretations of a story that wasn't intentional, yet can absolutely be explained without too much mental gymnastics. Personally, I think it makes sense for the game's Control ending. Like I said before, Control and Synthesis don't feel realistic, but, maybe it would if Shepard was indoctrinated the whole time. Of course, that outcome would fly in the face of what we've been talking about, right? That would take choice out of the player's hands. So I don't think that's a reasonable solution to the ending, but it's fun to think about. In the end, was Mass Effect 3 really that bad? Despite my belief that this ending didn't honor player choice, my answer is still the same as it was back in 2012. No, it wasn't that bad. The last few minutes of an experience do not define the entire game, and they certainly don't define the entire trilogy. No matter how much I disagree with the ending, my enjoyment doesn't hinge on the final outcome. I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. I just can't reduce the value of Mass Effect 3 down to red, blue, green because it would ignore the journey that I took to get there and everything I loved about the game up until that point. For me, Mass Effect 3 resolves so many hugely important narrative arcs before Shepard even goes on that final assault. This game made me smile and cry and everything in between long before that moment. Perhaps that speaks to how underwhelming the ending really was, right? But as a whole, Mass Effect 3 is an excellent video game, and it ultimately satisfied me. It really speaks to how incredible this story is as a whole that I can still enjoy it despite not loving the final moment. I can imagine a future. I can play a mod that sort of rights that ship, and I can look at this product and say, yeah, this was incredible. I'm just so glad that BioWare made this game, and I'm glad I got to go for one more adventure in this universe that I love so much. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please let me know by clicking the like button. I'm working on my next 2021 review. We're going back to Assassin's Creed for Assassin's Creed Unity. If that sounds like something you'd like to watch, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and click the bell to receive a live notification so you don't miss that video. You can also follow me on social media. I'm jayveeonYT on Twitter and jayvee.yt on Instagram for updates on all of my content. If you want to chat more about any game, join our community Discord server. Links for everything are in the description below. Big thanks to my YouTube members, Ultra fans Bill and Cam, Super fans Tipsy Sergey, Tarl K, and William. Fans Matthew, Spyro, Level 42, JVO, Bloodsky, and Kamal. And supporters Nos, Adam, Mr. Hollow, Quickness, Firkin, Jay, Sam, Abhishek, Ferris, Report, Gabrielle, Abraham, John, and Sung for supporting the channel. If you want to support me further, click the join button below this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.